Welcome back to the channel. So glad you could join me today. I'm going to show you how to break your league with the elite quarterbacks. Why 6-point passing touchdown changes everything. But first off, we got to hit that intro. Brian, roll it. So what does 6-point passing touchdown actually do to your league? I was curious about it. You know, I've been working on quarterback framework, putting together the pieces, trying to figure out what makes a good quarterback good. What makes an elite quarterback elite, and what makes the next tier of quarterback that next tier. If you tapped into anything I did with Dynasty framework of quarterbacks, you will know that most of these quarterbacks in 4-point passing touchdown leagues are really buoyed by rushing, and rushing gives you that elite ceiling. So my guy Dynasty Barry did a little bit more legwork for me. We just changed one simple setting in that league from 4-point passing touchdown to 6-point passing touchdown, which is becoming the norm in most leagues that you play. Whether it be redraft, whether it be Dynasty, 6-point passing touchdown is becoming the norm almost across the board. Now, it still has some room to grow, still has some more time to catch up to the overall numbers of 4-point passing touchdown, the legacy type leagues, but 6-point is fast approaching. So if you play in a 6-point passing touchdown league, how can you absolutely break your league? Dynasty Barry put together the sheet. We got the numbers. We dug into it. I'm looking at it right now, and 6-point passing touchdowns have changed everything for me in these league types. I used to just think that maybe that extra 2 points was just a little extra boost, just made quarterbacks a little bit more valuable. That couldn't be farther from the truth. They absolutely annihilate leagues. And I'm looking at the same 5 years of data going back to 2019 when Dynasty Barry pulled these numbers for me. Very similar to what I already did with the 4-point framework. But there are 12 quarterbacks in the top 38 of the entirety of this league in WoRP. Multi-year WoRP, 5-year WoRP, looking back through 2019. 12 quarterbacks in the top 38. That is absolutely ridiculous. You factor in, especially in Dynasty, the positional scarcity of quarterbacks. These guys should almost be untouchable. No one should be able to get their hands on Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson, maybe? Jayden Daniels? I'm not going to ruin you guys right off the bat with my Jayden Daniels love. But that's where it's at. Historically, 5 quarterbacks will exceed 2.0 WoRP, meaning that they will win 2 games above a replacement level player. That's nuts. 5. Count them, almost every single year. 3 wide receivers and 3 running backs also exceed 2.0 WoRP. So just to give you the reference point, there's 2 more quarterbacks on average that are hitting these numbers. 11 quarterbacks will hit 1.5 WoRP or better. And the 12th is pretty damn close, right there on the fringe. The fall off from quarterback 1 though to QB 13 outside of that range is the equivalent of having the wide receiver 9 or RB 6 or the tight end 1 on your team. It is a massive difference. Even though all quarterback scoring is elevated with 6-point passing touchdowns, the WoRP difference is amazing. It is amazing between the haves and the kind of haves, and then especially the have-nots. So if you have a Josh Allen, the next person maybe have a quarterback, maybe what we think Justin Herbert could be this year. Maybe that back-end QB1, high-end QB2. Not bad if you have Justin Herbert, but if you have Josh Allen, that's the equivalent of actually having an extra wide receiver 9 or RB6 or the number 1 overall tight end. That is nuts, and that is a positional advantage that will absolutely destroy and break your league. So how about the actual numbers? Let's look at all the elite quarterbacks who fall into that category who are giving you 2.0 WoRP or better. Elite quarterbacks with 2.0 WoRP or better in 6-point passing touchdown leagues average a whopping 27.1 fantasy points per game. Let me fucking say that again. 27.1 fantasy points per game, and it comes out to a 2.49 WoRP historically. The next tier, albeit not as good, still averages an incredible 22.6 fantasy points per game. So that next tier is defined as those guys in that 1.5 to 1.99 WoRP. Can't quite hit 2, but still very good. 22.6 fantasy points per game, and they give you an average WoRP of 1.7. Now let's dive into the actual averages, the actual stats that are needed to hit these different tiers. If you've been following along, you know what I listed off already for the guys in 4-point passing touchdown leagues. And let me tell you the difference in 6-point passing touchdown leagues, and it's not as great as I would have thought. It's pretty even across the board. The most surprising part about all of this so far has been the amount of fantasy points per game scored and the overall WoRP value to your team by having an elite quarterback. But the actual numbers, when our sample size got much bigger and more guys falling into these categories, whether it's elite or the next tier, is that the overall averages, the passing outlier averages, the rushing outlier averages didn't really change too much. As far as the elite tier, the average number of rushing yards needed to be in that elite tier only came down 80. And for some guys, that's one game. For a lot of guys, it might be 2, maybe 3. Rushing touchdowns only fell by 1, and the passing stats almost remained identical across the board. Now, if you want to look at the quarterbacks in the next tier, what happened to those averages? It became a lot easier, at least for those 1.5 WoRP to 1.99 WoRP guys, to actually get into that tier. The stats universally almost come down across the board. To hit that back end QB 1-ish type mark, passing yards came down by 200, rushing yards down by 50, and passing touchdowns came down by 4. That's usually 2 games for most guys. So it's like 2 free games just to hit that next tier, which is why you see that tier, especially last year, littered with a lot of guys that we think are good, but not great. That included Brock Purdy, Patrick Mahomes, Tua, Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, CJ Stroud, Sam Howell, Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert, and Trevor Lawrence. And this was an overall down year for quarterbacks, but especially just at the top. One of the most interesting trends when Barry put this together is how the elite quarterbacks, the elite scoring seasons, essentially has gotten smaller. When you look at it on the chart, it's very big in 2020. We had guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Kyler Murray, Russ, Deshaun Watson, Ryan Tannehill, Justin Herbert, Tom Brady, Lamar Jackson, all give you an average of 28 fantasy points per game and a 2.40 WoRP. Those are your elite guys. This past year, you only had 5. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Lamar, and Jordan Love. But if you want to look at that next tier of guys, the next tier, speaking of 2020, there was only 2 quarterbacks who fell in that 1.5 to 1.99 WoRP, Kirk Cousins and Ben Roethlisberger. Shout out to old-timey Big Ben. And then I just told you about 2023, how many quarterbacks you had. It is a hell of a lot more than 2. So it seems like it's becoming a lot easier for these middling quarterbacks to kind of get up in that 1.5 range. If you kind of want to think about these guys in a dynasty startup, these are the quarterbacks you're probably looking at taking in round 4, 5, maybe some of these guys will be 3rd round picks, but that's kind of the general range where a lot of these guys end up going. These kind of like good QB2 types, these kind of good guys that you're going to plug into your super flex spot. I don't think a lot of people are building their dynasty teams around these guys being quarterback 1. If you are, it's fine in 6-point passing touchdown league, because if you can get 2 of them, you can get away with it. But I'm telling you, the elite quarterbacks provide such an advantage, absolutely just breaking it. I know I mentioned the stats earlier, but listen to the fantasy points per game again. 27 fantasy points for the elite tier and 22 for the almost elite tier. Think about that little gap between being elite and almost elite. It is 5 fucking fantasy points per game. 5. That's a lot. That is a lot in this game of fantasy that we play. So what about running outliers and passing outliers? Just a reminder, if you're considered a running outlier, you threw for less than 4,000 yards. And if you're a passing outlier, you ran for less than 400 yards. There's no real change to running outliers in the elite tier. Passing outliers, they come down a little bit. 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. Passing, not running. The next tier is interesting for rushing quarterbacks because so many more guys are getting into this that it kind of skews the averages a little bit. So your average yards passing goes up by 400. One hell of a fucking game for a quarterback to have 400 yards, but the rushing yards is almost cut in half. It comes down by 350 yards. You're going to see a lot more quarterbacks in that next tier where they're right at that 3,500 yards passing somewhere in there. Not as many Jalen Hurts, not as many Lamar Jackson or Justin Fields, especially Justin Fields with his season 2 years ago, way under 3,000 yards passing, 2,200 yards. But you have a lot more guys who come in like Josh Allen in 2019, 3,000 yards passing, 500 1,500 yards rushing, 9 touchdowns running, and 20 passing touchdowns through the air. You're going to have guys like Ben Roethlisberger in 2020. Think about this. Ben Roethlisberger under 4,000 passing yards, 3,800 through the air, 11 rushing yards, 11 rushing yards, no touchdowns, and 33 passing touchdowns. So Mr. Statue, Ben Roethlisberger. The next tier becomes a lot easier for these running outliers to make it in there because you're getting boosted so much by the passing touchdown being 6 points. You don't have to run that much, which is why the passing yards generally come up and the running yards come down. So what are some of the final conclusions that we can draw from this? I already said the fantasy points per game between the elite and the next tier is massive. And ideally in a perfect world, especially in Dynasty leagues, I would love to walk away with 2 of those top 5, top 6 guys coming out of a startup, whether that be auction or snake draft, or even if I'm roster constructing and trying to build a team in a league that's already existing. You really should be doing almost whatever it takes in 6-point passing touchdown leagues to land you Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen. If you think Patrick Mahomes gets back into that elite territory, boom, Patrick Mahomes. If you want to make the bet on Dak Prescott or Joe Burrow continuing to thrive in up-tempo, high-scoring offenses in 6-point passing touchdown leagues, by all means go for it. But say you can't. Say you're picking at the back end of a first round in a startup. It is still okay to shoot your shot on those super high upside wide receivers like CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. If you throw Amon-Ra St. Brown into the mix, that is fine. But those are the only 4 guys you should be looking at. Those are the only class of player that you should be looking at outside of quarterback in 6-point passing touchdown league. Say you pick at the 112 and somebody had already taken some of those wide receivers and you're staring at QB 6 or QB 7 off the board. Take them, double tap them. Come away with 2 guys at the high end of that next tier. Come away with 2 quarterbacks that are going to put up on average 22, 23 points per game, and you're going to have a massive advantage over your league. Because I'm telling you, once you get to about QB 12 or 13 historically, the fall off is straight down. The fall off becomes abysmal. And especially in today's day and age where we're seeing so many quarterback injuries, so many of these other quarterbacks coming in, backups who are turds, who struggle to throw 1, maybe 2 touchdowns in a game if you're lucky. Yes, can you squeak by? Probably, but historically it tells you that's a bad bet. It's a terrible bet. I want to shoot for the elite tier and that next group. And then after that, I really don't want to look at quarterback. I'll be drafting all the wide receivers and running backs and tight ends after that, but I want those quarterbacks. I want to fill out my quarterback and my super flex position in 6-point passing touchdown leagues. Heaven forbid if it's a 2-quarterback league. You should be smashing the hell out of quarterbacks in 2-quarterback leagues. This is setting up beautifully in every 6-point passing touchdown league I have to be that asshole who QB hoards because the advantage is so damn massive. And finally, I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but 2 elite quarterbacks, 2 game-breaking ones is absolutely paramount to just setting your league on fire, pushing the nuclear launch code buttons, just sending your league into the abyss, blowing them right out of the fucking water. I'm going to put together one scenario for you just to emphasize, even just based on last year, how big of an advantage this would have been. So let's take Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts. If you combine them together, they're scoring over 52 fantasy points per game for your team. If you're a WoRP guy like me, the combined WoRP of them is over 5 games for 2 quarterbacks. Now, even say you got lucky with late round quarterback drafting last year. You had some hits. Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff had great years. If I combine them together, they're at 41 fantasy points. There's an 11-point difference. If you want to know the WoRP, it comes out to about 3.33. So almost 2 games of an advantage with the 2 elite quarterbacks versus 2 guys that you got in the middle rounds that absolutely smashed for you relative to how much you had to pay for. But you have an 11 fantasy points per game differential. And just to clarify exactly what that means, the team with the 2 elite quarterbacks essentially got to start a free Terry McLaurin. So in this league format, it's a start 10. Essentially, they got to start an extra flex and just slot Terry McLaurin in every single week. Let that sink in, and let that sink in about how you go out and approach the quarterback position. What kind of offers are you making? Is it a redraft league? If it's a redraft league and everybody's out there going and getting Christian McCaffrey or CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and it's a Superflex 6-point passing touchdown league, smash them right in the mouth with your knowledge of where elite fantasy points come from, and it comes from these elite quarterbacks. If it's a Dynasty league and somebody's going to fuck around in a 6-point passing touchdown league and let you walk away with 2 elite quarterbacks, one for your QB spot and another one for your Superflex, just start writing that check out for how much money you're going to spend at the casino thanks to all the winnings you're taking from your league. You almost need to put them as dependents on your tax return. If your league is going to fuck up this bad, make sure you take advantage of them. Make sure that you pound them right into the ground. Full stop. If you like what we're doing over here at South Harmon, please do us a favor, go down, hit the subscribe button, hit the like, and comment away. Do you have any elite quarterback stacks in 6-point passing touchdown leagues? If not, are you going to go out and try to make some of these deals? I know I am, and I'm hoping to get it done before this video drops. I'm hoping to take advantage of my league one more time before the secret and the cat is out of the bag. Appreciate everybody's time. We'll see y'all back here same time, same place next week for the next solo vid drop. Love y'all. I'm out of here. Peace.